I studied piano in Frankfurt on the Main at the Raff Conservatoire of Music under Max Schwarz, a former pupil of Hans von Bülow and of Liszt, and having excited some attention in Frankfurt at the Conservatoire concerts by a performance of 3 etudes of Liszt, Feux Follets, Paysage, and Mazeppa, the directors of the Raff Conservatoire were desirous that I should play these works to the master himself. With the concurrence of Hans von Bülow, who was the honorary president of the Raff Conservatoire, I set out for Weimar armed with a letter of introduction to Liszt. It was a serene Sunday morning in the early days of June 1885. I was accompanied by Arthur Freetime, one of the best pupils of Liszt, who acted as his secretary. The meeting took place in the music room of Liszt's house, which was a villa and called the Hofgärtnerei, in the grounds of the Grand Ducal Palace. I remember it as a pleasant room with tall windows looking on to the park, which was interspersed by an occasional oak tree and some sycamore bushes. It breathed the atmosphere of infinite peace and culture. Something of the spirit of Goethe and Schiller hovered over the house. It was indeed a haven of rest and a source of inspiration for the poet and musician. In the room were 2 pianos, a Bechstein Grand and an Ebach upright. There were no portraits on the walls, but on the writing desk were 2 small photographs, one of Hans von Bülow and the other of Vera Mukhanov, a lifelong friend of Liszt. Off the study on the right-hand side of the room, as I saw later, was Liszt's bedroom. Over the bedstead hung a large cross and a picture of his named saint, St. Francis of Assisi. Suddenly the door of this bedroom opened, and there stood before me the man who as a child had received the kiss of consecration from the mighty Beethoven himself, who had been during their lifetime the friend of Chopin, of Paganini, the pioneer for Hector Berlioz and Richard Wagner, the inventor of a new form in orchestral music, namely the symphonic poem, the teacher, the preceptor of Karl Tausig and Hans von Bülow, and all the great pianists from the 40s of the last century down to that day in 1886. Here was the astounding personality who had exercised such an incredible influence in music, and not only in France and Germany, but in Russia. It would have been a moving experience to meet such a man today. To the boy I was then, it was simply overwhelming. He read the letter of introduction, turned to me with his commanding yet kindly eye, and said, "Schwarz writes that you play, among other things, the fugue from Opus 106. Here he hummed the theme, which sounded from his lips like the growl of a lion, and said, giving me a friendly slap on the shoulder, 'Tomorrow you play the fugue from Opus 106. And the interview was at an end. I rushed from that room in an indescribable state of mind. Freetime my good friend followed more leisurely, murmuring, "Isn't he wonderful? Ah, glorious youth!" As we wandered down the alley on that unforgettable Sunday morning, all the birds on the trees, the innumerable bullfinches, the magpies, the blackbirds, the robin redbreasts, seemed to warble more joyously, more melodiously than usual. I took it for granted that they were singing St. Francis' Sermon to the Birds, one of the finest of Liszt's inspirations. It was because of my playing of some of Liszt's works that Schwartz had given me his recommendation, so I naturally assumed that he would ask me to play something of his own. I had been working on his etude transcendental, which was pretty stiff going for a student. This is the one I hoped he would ask me to play. It is called Feux Follets, or Will of the Wisp. Any of you who remember the fireflies on summer evenings in the forests of the Tyrol will recognize the source of Liszt's inspiration.